I'm the host of the New Republic show right now. I'm honored to be joined by Michael Podhorzer, who's a longtime labor leader who now writes and comments about politics. He writes a great newsletter called Weekend Reading that sort of goes through and analyzes a lot of political trends. And really, he's been a great advocate for defending not just really the Democrats, but democracy in a very important way. So, Michael, welcome.
Great. It's great to be with you again, Perry.
So we're going to sort of dive into the election results. I know we wanted to go through, we had the results, blue wave, obviously. We wanted to sort of dive in and look very carefully at what happened and what we can learn from that. So we're going to go through and look at the states a little bit individually, a little bit combined. And so what I want to start with, and I want you to react, I'm going to give one takeaway I had and get your response to it. Um, the first one was the first takeaway I had essentially was looking at the data is either the racial realignment never happened or it already ended. And what I mean by that is there was a lot of talk after 2024 and in the run up to it about black voters and Latinos, particularly black men and Latino men, and also voters under 30 moving to the right. So we've had this whole discourse about you have to have a Joe Rogan of the left and sort of like what's the wokesters have gone too far and so on. And so let me go through these data briefly here. According to the 2024 exit poll, Trump won 13% of black voters. But in New Jersey, 5%. In Virginia, 7% in the last week's election. According to exit polls again, black men, 21% for Trump, 2024, 7% New Jersey, 11% Virginia. Voters under 30, 43% for Trump, 31 New Jersey, 29 Virginia. Latinos, 46% for Trump nationally 2024, 31 New Jersey, 33 Virginia. Latino men, 54% for Trump 2024, 38, 47. In other words, big drops with black people, black men, Latinos, Latino men compared from 2024 to 2025. So in my view, that suggests maybe the New York Times and everyone else interviewing every black man who voted for Trump was a bit of a mistake and an overreaction in the last election. But Michael, what's your kind of response to what I'm laying out there?
Sure. No, I think you're raising something really important and something I think folks who are joining in should know that you were saying before it was proved, right? And that's really important. I think some people are talking about, will this blue wave bring accountability? And what they generally mean, will it constrain MAGA or Trump? But it would be great if this could also be an accountability election for the commentariat that keep telling us the wrong thing about what's going on in America, right? That once again they're sticking to their prior mistakes, right? And so they just really got dug in on this narrative about how, as you say, young people, young black men, young Latino men were moving, quote, right. And they based that on the conclusion that because Trump did better, it wasn't Harris doing worse. And as I've written a lot about, as you know, we're in this period of um, people really being dissatisfied with the way the government works with both parties to a degree that really we haven't seen before, right? In the last 10 elections, 9 times the party in power lost. So essentially, I wrote this like the week after the election, the Democrats had just taken the most important step towards winning the next set of elections by losing the one that just happened, right? And so once that happened, those voters shouldn't be thought of as being in those demographic categories, but being a group of voters who are completely dissatisfied with the way politics is helping them in their lives. And if we thought about it that way, we'd have a much better understanding of what's happening in American politics. You have, about 30%-ish on both sides only that actually like Democrats or Republicans. But we just ignore this unprecedented level of dissatisfaction with both.
What are your takeaways from New Jersey and Virginia, or like the sort of like it's just those two states specifically? Let's go start with there. Yeah.
Well, I think it reflects what happened almost literally everywhere, right? The Georgia public utility elections, way down ballot elections all over the country, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court retention elections. And it really speaks to something that you've written about and we've talked about that I think we shouldn't lose sight of, right? For the last however many months, there's been this, big war about should Democrats be moderate? Should Democrat, wins over replacement? And how much is the moderate premium? And even the folks who are like bullish on moderation are talking about maybe 2 or 3 points or whatever. And we just saw like a 10-point swing, no matter what you were like, where you fit on that continuum. And that's sort of what's clueless about the people who are engaging in that debate, because it's basically the debate has been captured, if I use a sports metaphor, by people who think the only thing that matters in winning a football game is how well you can kick extra points and field goals. That that like, no, we're not going to talk about how to win touchdowns, right? There's a group of analysts and strategists who have lost sight of how you actually win elections and how you actually make big gains.
And what should the discourse be about instead?
Well, I think the discourse should be and should have been for at least the last 10, 15 years about the threat, and now like more than a threat, being posed by this rising fascist movement.
Right.
And the debate as it's carried on, the discourse, as you say, as it's carried on right now, flattens that to a messaging question
I see.
about like how to talk, whether you should talk about Trump and that sort of thing, rather than actually see that it's dismantling the things that people in this country really want, right?
One thing you've taught me a lot, and reading you has helped me understand, is like in an election in which there's a wave. Usually, there's a big debate in this discourse I'm describing between what's called persuasion and what's called turnout. And
Right.
so, the more moderate side says you win elections with swing voters and you persuade them, and the more progressive side, at times, although it's getting better, occasionally will say you win elections by just turning out the most people on your side. But if you look at the exit polls and other data in Virginia and New Jersey, and probably in other states too, from last week, what you see is like there are certain counties and exit polls suggesting actual people who voted for Trump did change and vote for Spamberger and Sherrill. You also had what's pretty fairly clear is that the number of people who voted for Harris was, as a percentage, was large. The people who voted, there was more turnout for the Democratic voting base than the Republican voting base. So you had turnout and persuasion changes, and those are not contradictory. But if you think about these elections as being backlashes or about something broader than what the message is, then it's not surprising that you have turnout and persuasion would go the same way.
Right. And I think the one thing I'd offer to make better sense of the persuasion turnout conversation is that these are words really, especially right after Clinton lost in 2016, as you said, become so ideologically loaded, right? And so if you're a progressive, you think, well, it's got to be turnout. And if you're a moderate, you say it's got to be persuasion. And both, ask us to think of the sort of avatar of each, which is what makes their arguments convincing. But if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, we're saying that actually the people who went back and forth in the elections you're talking about aren't really progressive or moderate. They're just pissed off. And and so using the word persuasion, which implies that you're having a rational conversation in which you're trying to convince one of these voters that you're going to do a better job, completely misses the mark, because Trump didn't convince those voters he'd do a better job in 2024. And I'd argue, sorry for some people, that neither did Spanberger or Cheryl, right? That, right? It
We
just,
shouldn't get our Spanish president shirts yet. You're saying we should
right,
hold off on that?
right. It's like being in the right place at the right time and not screwing up. The, but again, it's like, so it's absolutely true that this group of voters has been swinging back and forth, but it's not true that it's because of a great message. It's because of like external conditions, right?
So I guess that part of it is like your position is almost akin to like, what did we learn from last week? You're, in other words, part of what you're saying is there's not a magic word that Spamberger or Cheryl used that we can sort of learn from for 2028 or 2026.
Right. I mean,
You're not sure. You, yeah.
yeah, what we learned is basically, like gravity works, right? That, right. I mean, that, right. Yes, once again, like it's a different way of understanding politics and elections that has been reliable, certainly throughout the 21st century, worked again, right?
Let me ask a different question. You and I assume you think that that a lot of people cannot afford goods, and affordability is an actual human problem for human people.
Right.
But I suspect you are not sure that Democrats have solved the affordability issue based on last week.
Not at all.
Okay.
Right. I mean, and it's another sort of polling enabled misstep in the political discourse, right? Is this sort of idea that you win an election and it must be for the thing you want to have won the election for,
Right.
right? And so I think there's a lot of that going on, right? If you look underneath in some of the exits and more broadly in the polls, there wasn't just a sudden boost in people's confidence that Democrats can deliver lower, more affordable prices, right? There's just no confidence in that, right? I mean, they're basically winning despite people not really believing their rhetoric. And that's like the problem.
I want to talk about this racial realignment idea more generally because I think that was important. I mean, there is. Well, how do you see the role of like you are somewhat skeptical of this whole thinking about race as a um, category of American politics as opposed to other parts of it? How do you perceive the sort of I guess the context has been Asian, Latino, and Black voters are going to become Democratic, and that's going to create this sort of like perpetual Democratic majority. And now that's been rejected, and you have people saying the Republicans will be the working class majority that'll include. And I guess your view is both these things were nonsense the whole time.
Well, 90%. I think that uh, what's important in someone voting, is the dominant identities people feel for themselves, right? And those are mostly not the demographic characteristics that are imposed on them by pundits and commentators and pollsters. The one exception continues to be Black, right? Because unlike other quote minority groups, which get rolled in with it, the you can't live in America and decide in the same way you can with other ethnicities to be white, right? And because the most rest of America doesn't cooperate with that, right? And so for that reason, we've seen 90-10 for generations, right? Because in that one instance, the demographic category is actually pretty correlated with people's sense of identity, right?
But Michael,
But
it was 86-13 last time, so everything has changed. You
yeah, but
understand, right?
that's still a pretty
Yeah.
look for other. There are only two groups of any size in American politics that are over 75 even, right? And that's Blacks and white evangelicals,
Those are the two groups whose
right?
identity does
Right,
tell us a lot. Okay.
right. And it's not just to go a little deeper with both. It's not just the that demographic kind of marker. It's that in both instances, most of the people in that group live within a social ecosystem that is pretty homogeneous, right? If you're a white evangelical, you're probably going to church at least once a week. You're in a place that's very dense with those kind of with your people who feel the same way, and that's very reinforcing. And as you know, there's um, a great book called Steadfast Democrats that goes through the same thing and explaining that cohesion in black voting, right? And if you look at both, and this gets, I think, to your 13%, is that the in both instances, the rates are much closer to 90 or above where people are geographically clustered.
Okay.
And so, like a white evangelical in Boston is probably 60-40, right? Whereas if they're in Alabama, they're 95-5,
Okay.
right?
I want to go to New York, and this gives a more of a Democratic versus Democratic race. So I
Yeah.
wanted, I looked at the exits a little bit because I was curious, and because I guess part of it is I'm skeptical of this, like, uh, I would like politics to be about more about concerns of what I would is Americans who are struggling to afford things. I think the working class can be a real thing that, and politics can help that. It can also become like a code word for for a lot of things going on. So, and I guess in this case, Zoran won, and he campaigned and talked about the working class a lot, and so did Bernie Sanders. But the results show something a little bit different, which is that the core groups that Zoran won were based on not income or degree, but really ideology and age. Like, so Zoran won 75% among those 18 to 29. He won 65% among those 30 to 44. Among those with no college degree, he won 42% compared to Cuomo's 47, so about a tie. Among those whose income was below $3,000, Zoran won 47, Cuomo 44, so about a tie. Among renters, which is a good sort of proxy for income, but also a proxy for age, Zoran got 59%. And then ideology, Zoran won 78% of liberals, but only 33% of moderates in New York. He won 68% of self-identified Democrats. So the reason I say all that, and also looking at the results in Minneapolis, where the socialist candidate lost, and Seattle, where there's a very close race, I'm not sure if Zoran has solved the Democrats' challenges in some way with the working class or with lower income people. I do think he did very well with younger people and with people who are pretty liberal. And I think that might be a more honest take than he's by talking about rent freezes, he's won the entire working class. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think he did find one really important key to winning elections like that, which is running against a failed governor who was enormously unpopular and was completely discredited. And it's kind of a controlled experiment because the other races you talked about
A Cuomo.
that didn't have a Cuomo.
Yes.
So again, that I think New York's a little different because it's just New York, right? The and I think I happened to be there the week before the election, not for the election, but to his credit, I've really rarely in the last 20 whatever years seen people actually just be happy
Yes.
that
He did a great
they're
job. Nothing, not, I
right.
can't take away
That
from that.
right.
Yes.
It's like,
Great enthusiasm.
I
Obama
talk
level enthusiasm.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. It's like those are the only two times I've really seen a thing where you just like walk up to people and say, "Hey, like, what about the race?" And they go, "Oh, right." So I think it's really a one-off in so many ways that trying to take lessons from it is tough. I will do one thing though in like pulling something out about what you were saying from the exits that I think speaks to a larger problem with how polling is looked at to try to get underneath it. Because if you like go to the whichever exit poll sheet and you look at all of it, all you're really, almost everything is one dimensional, right? Everything you listed was on this income, this age. And I don't know about you, but like I'm a bunch of things together, right? And that explain me better than any of those categories. And so one of the things,
Well, I'm black, as we noted, so people will not be
right,
surprised to know
right,
that I voted for Harris last time. But
right,
anyway, go ahead.
right.
Uh,
But but one of the things I did notice that happened actually to combine a few, but in a different kind of way,
yeah.
was by how long you lived in New York.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And there it was that really sharp line, right?
So
The
Cuomo, who does better? I don't actually look at who does better.
no, if you've lived there the longest, you were least for
Okay.
Mondani,
Oh wow. Okay.
right? The more recently you arrived, the more you were for him,
So that's
right?
capturing age. That's probably
Right,
capturing
right,
immigration status. That's capturing
right.
a
It's
bunch of
kept
things.
right.
And renters probably. Okay. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
right, right. In a way that like has a sharper, um, more lopsided in each category than the ones you're talking
Yeah.
about. And for me, like before I then think about whether we should look at a particular category as a serious thing, it's really got to be at least 3 to 1, one way or the other. Because if it's less, then there's lots of other stuff going on. And so to then pin it on that named thing is just misleading yourself.
Is there much we can learn from? So your point is run against Andrew Cuomo is always good if you're in a
Right.
Democratic primary. So there's not okay. So I worry
No,
there's
I do
not.
think there's one really big thing to take away from
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
that I think when we listen to the sort of, you know, the moderate industrial complex about all of this, that's really important, is that in cycles like this, you really have to be much more ambitious about how many races you put in play, because you don't even know where this is going to pan out at this point, right? And, you know, I keep hearing, and I want to sort of whatever, like just how Democrats have to be like Rahm was in 2006. And that is such a misunderstanding of what happened, basically how he screwed up in 2006, in this way. So for folks who don't know what I'm talking about, so the basic idea in 2006 was Rahm Emanuel became head of the trip and said, we're going to go and we're going to get these military candidates. We're going to get really conservative people. We're going to really be focused and do do this. And Democrats had a great 2006. But what really isn't understood is how he, like by himself, narrowed the battlefield because, right, and this is a great story, sort of an arc of things. So as Terry said, I think at the beginning, I was before I retired, I was political director of the AFL-CIO, doing this for a very long time. Anyway, in 2006, there was a candidate that the labor movement was supporting in Minnesota that Ron was just ripping us to not waste. He actually said his money on, even though it's like our union
It's one.
members,
Right. Of
his
course.
money. And
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and that Minnesota candidate was Tim Walz.
Yes.
And and there were about 13 Democrats who came within 3 points in 2006 and lost, which is very unusual in a wave year, right? Most of the close races go to the party that wins. And half of them won in 2008, right? He actually reduced the number of races Democrats could win in 2006. And so if there's a lesson, it's like, don't let that happen again, right? Don't try to suppress folks. Don't try to drain them of resources because you are going to find if this continues and if the elections aren't subverted and all those kinds of things. Like, it's just going to happen all over the
In other
place.
words, if we're having a wave election, an anti-incumbent, anti-president wave, it's going to hit a lot of places, some of which are going to be surprising to us,
Right.
and just be, and it won't necessarily, and a quote unquote lefty might win, or a moderate. The kind of people who will win will not. Actually, my Congress, or our congressman here in Louisville for a long time, was named John Yarmouth. He
Yeah.
also won that year. He
Yeah.
also faced the Rahm wants to have some kind of veteran one. He was a more progressive. He had run a
Right.
newspaper before. He also won that year. He won the primary, won the general, despite Rahm too, in the same way, because it was a wave, and the wave hit everywhere.
Right. And in a way I hadn't really thought of till you were talking about Yarmouth too. I mean, one of the things that we like really learned from this last election was Democrats, like the problem was they couldn't reach people in media they were in, and the people who were checked out and all of that. And we also know how it's just how little local media there is anymore. Right. What that just makes it even more likely that like just people are going to vote for the D down ballot, right? Because they don't even hear about whether he's a lefty or,
Oh,
whatever, right? They know nothing. But they know sort of that they're mad. And so, yeah, it becomes candidate um, attributes one way or the other, not going to make much of a difference.
well, I guess that makes me ask you the last question here. Like,
Yeah.
so I guess Zoran got a lot of credit for being innovative in media, videos, etc. So, and I think people have talked about that being essential. Is that essential in New York, or is that essential? These sort of, can you go on a 2 hour podcast? I'm dubious of the idea the average House candidate needs to be go on a 2 hour podcast, or they get booked on a 2 hour podcast because Joe Rogan is not interviewing random House candidates. But do you think how important are these sort of like media skills part of it in this world where I agree local media is declining or dead in a lot of places?
I think it's one of those things where, and this is sort of the problem with like looking for lessons,
Yeah.
is that there are some things that if like you're in the top 1% of doing something, it doesn't it's not about that particular channel. It's about you. And so the fact that he can do that is, yeah, he understands TikTok, but he also has a natural ability, right? That means that like if you or I probably tried to run a race and just really knew how to do TikToks, it wouldn't help them.
Or Abigail Spanberg, as far as
Right,
I know,
right,
does not have great TikTok strategy. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
And so like it's hard, you shouldn't confuse it. And the other thing that I think is really important, because this is a mistake I've seen made since like 1973, is that like tacticians confuse the power of novelty with something inherent in the tactic, right? So in 1972, the McGovern campaign, right, did really well because they sent letters to voters that were like 2 or 3 pages, right? And that really work because no one ever got letters from political candidates, right? And you remember how, like, the first time you got an long email about this stuff, it was, oh my God, email really works. And then texts, and then whatever. No, it's that you basically ambush people who aren't expecting political content in that channel. And so they like pay attention for the first X
First
times,
time. I see. Right.
right? And then everyone else does it, burns out the channel,
Yep.
and like the next thing. But the through line is novelty, right? It's like showing up where you're not expected rather than like the channel itself.
That's a good. I'm going to reflect on it because I know all my friends complain. I get text messages from the Democrats constantly, and it's annoying to me. And I think that tactic was innovative.
Oh my God, the first time you got text, like
Yeah.
the ROI on the first like year cycle of text messaging was enormous,
Right.
right? And then just gets burnt out because it isn't that like that you're texting. It's that you don't at the beginning you didn't expect to find that text on your phone, right? Now you see even things that ought to get your attention, you just roll your eyes and hit spam, right?
Any final thoughts about the election results? I think that's a good, just I'll let you go here.
Yeah, it's great talking, and hope folks really follow you at the New Republic. You do great work.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me, Michael. Good to see everybody.
Sure.
Bye bye.
Yeah. Take care.